for me, my fundamental interest, not my fundamental interest, but I guess one of my main interests in communal ontology is how we relate to each other as persons. And I think, to go back to Matthew 25,
the condition of our sin, like the possibility of our sin, is Christ on the cross, because any sin is persecuting Christ, right? Exactly what Christ says to Saul, right? But the only way we can persecute Christ, because he's literally God, is if he allows us to, which is the cross, right? But at the same time, the cross is the overcoming of our sin, the negation of our sin. So you have this insane coincidence of opposites, like sort of meeting point where the very possibility of sin becomes identical with its negation. And that's why when you sin, you take on a mode of being that does not in fact exist. Or perhaps a better translation, as I was corrected on Twitter, is you take on a disposition of being that, or a disposition that does not really exist. And this I talked with Hunter and shared some of my work on like Lacan and Zizek and their stuff on the imagination and stuff like this. And it's very, very fascinating reading it with Maximus. Maximus essentially has the notion of the split subject, the split between the split between, I guess, like reality as it truly is, and then our positing of essentially imaginary realities. Because for Maximus, all sin has to have an imaginary element, because if you knew the truth as the truth, sin would be impossible. That's like a metaphysical necessity for Maximus.
I think, to go back to Matthew 25, as you have done unto the least of these, you have done unto me.
Right.
This identification with Christ is not merely bound up in the life of the church. Now, obviously, I'm Orthodox, Trey, as you said. And I'm Orthodox for a reason. I do think that these hierarchies of being matter. But I think that there is something to be said also for this recognition that to be one in Christ, one in Christ's being, has something to do with something that is fundamentally deeper than confession in some way. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's something that
it's deep. Wait,
it's
deeper than confession. What do you mean?
It is bound up purely in, did you serve me as I was the least of these, right? And I don't know. I don't have any answers on that, but I think that it's challenging and potentially instructive. I think it's functionally impossible to believe in communal ontology and not to believe in universalism, simply because of the fact that if you are necessarily bound ontologically to your brother, then yeah, right. If your brother is in hell, you are also in hell, right? I don't know. I just
honestly, the most convincing argument that I've ever heard was this clip of Hart where he talks about the reality of personhood and basically the relational nature of personhood, to the point where like what you are cannot be separated from who you loved, because the content of your being is precisely that. So I certainly disagree with the Thomistic idea that you somehow will be so radically changed in the beatific vision that somehow your little child who died unbaptized and is in limbo or wherever you're somehow like delighted in that is the justice of God. Obviously, that's just, well, I mean, I don't want to call it retarded, but it is. But
yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean,
but Thomas isn't retarded.
I would go for maybe demonic, but it's a good word too.
Yeah. It's one of the worst. It's one of the worst Thomas Aquinas moments, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.